welcome back to KTN News Diary. Thank you so much for staying with us. And former presidential candidate and a businessman Jimmy Wanjigi was this morning hosted at our sister station Spice FM on Kenya's economy status, where he was shedding more light on the impact of the Finance Act 2023. Let's listen in.
Point where money now goes to the various ministries for expenditure.
For expenditure. So what is not a voted cannot go for expenditure.
And which also means that these revenue estimates we're talking about need to exist and need to be discussed by Parliament for this process to actually get to the point where they move along and get to the point where they're a vote-head and so forth.
Correct.
So if this isn't there, this shouldn't also exist.
Correct. Only Parliament approves.
Section 38 of the Public Finance Management Act. Submission of other budget documents to the National Assembly. I want to read the estimate. The format of the budget estimates shall include the following: a list of all entities that are to receive funds appropriated from the budget of the national government, estimate of revenue allocated to and expenditures projected from the Equalization Fund over the medium term, with an explanation of the reasons for those revenue allocations and expenditures and how these estimates comply with the policy developed by the Commission on Revenue Allocation and Article 216.
Estimates of revenue.
Yes. 3, all revenue allocations to county governments. 4, all estimated revenue by broad economic classification. 5, all estimated expenditure by vote and by program, what we've just discussed, clearly identifying both recurrent and development expenditure. And 6, an estimate of any budget deficit or surplus for the financial year and medium term and the proposed sources of financing.
Correct.
Now, Jimmy, you have been here before and you told us how, when you were talking about budgets and our figures, and you said Parliament over the last 9 years has approved this amount of money as our loans. And you said they approve it in this budget, because when they discuss estimates of budget deficit or surplus, when they approve a deficit, they have in essence approved borrowing. True?
You know,
you said that.
I love being on the show.
So if they've already discussed
Eric,
then they've already discussed sources of money.
Yeah. Now, where is that anchored? Our debt is only anchored in one estimate called expenditure estimates. Right? So development and recurrent.
Yes.
Recurrent is where you anchor repayments of our loans.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that is where, very interestingly, you find the repayments of external debt. You find repayments of domestic debt. Yet there's not been an approval to take domestic debt in development expenditure. There's no approval in the revenue estimates.
Wait. An estimate of any budget deficit or surplus and the proposed sources and the proposed sources of financing.
Where is it anchored? Where is it anchored? You see, understand it this way. Don't get confused. Don't get confused. This is very simple. You have an expenditure estimate that you table in the budget, right? And in that expenditure estimate, you have got development schedules,
yes,
and you have recurrent schedules.
Yes.
So in development, according to 15.2 of the PFM Act, is where you anchor our loans for development.
Yes.
In development appropriations.
Yes.
In recurrent, you have various expenditures that go out.
Yes.
That is where you anchor our salaries. That is where you anchor our payments of debt. All right?
Yes.
And this is where we estimated that our payments of debt over the last 9 years has come to 5.6 trillion. You draw those figures from that recurrent expenditure. All right? Recurrent expenditure bill estimates.
Yes.
All right? Now, domestic debt payments are in recurrent expenditure payments.
Yes.
So you find we are paying for domestic debt, but we never approved its uptake. We never approved its loan anywhere, because loans go to development. We never approved domestic funding for anything, including that what you're saying is
Why
the budget
not?
deficit. We have never approved it.
Sorry,
not?
Jimmy, are we unequivocally saying here that the only time, according to this, that the country can borrow money is for development? It necessarily wants to say it again.
You know,
Yes.
let me repeat and repeat. The only avenue they have in PFM, right, the Public Finance Management Act, to borrow outside of development is what is called short-term cash flow problems that must not exceed 5% of the last audited accounts and
Yes.
must be paid within a year. In other words, we have an emergency.
Yes.
Right.
That is normally estimated about 50 billion, and that is normally an overdraft at CBK. There is no avenue for borrowing outside of that in the medium term. That is beyond 1 year.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
So, the only medium term borrowing we can do is towards a development project.
Okay.
Right? Anything beyond 1 year is towards development project.
Okay.
So we have been taking domestic debt, right? That does not go towards development.
But how so, Jimmy?
Because if it was going
Domestic
to development,
debt, how is
if, it was-
domestic debt taken? There's bills and bonds.
now this is what
An
I'm trying to tell
infrastructure
you.
bond, for example.
This is what I'm trying
is
to
a
tell you.
development bond.
Parliament did not approve it.
But it approved for borrowing.
No, it only approved borrowing that is in the expenditure, development appropriations. That is the borrowing it approved. It approved projects borrowing for our development.
Yes.
It has not approved borrowing of domestic debt
For recurrent.
in any. No, there's no borrowing in
Hear
recurrent.
my argument, Jimmy.
Please understand.
Hear
Please
my
understand.
argument.
No, Eric, before you go on.
Okay.
This is very simple. Very simple.
Why is this simple thing so difficult to understand?
No, okay. City, let me explain,
Explain
it a bit
it.
better. Expenditure is tabled before the House.
Yes.
Appropriations. So let's not deal with the revenue estimates, expenditure.
Yes.
And there are two schedules. One is called development expenditure. Another one is called recurrent expenditure.
yes.
In recurrent expenditure, that's where we have salaries of government. You have all our loan payments, right? External loan payments. Domestic is also there.
Yes.
In development appropriations, estimates, is where you get approval to take loans because they are supposed to go towards development projects. Are we together?
No, we are not. And I'll tell you why. Because you said the approval to finance a budget is in the revenue estimates. The approval to finance, right? And then the approval to spend is in the expenditure
The approval
estimates.
to collect revenue,
Yes.
not to finance, to collect revenue.
To finance the budget. Because the budget estimates, like we've just read, include those domestic and other sources of revenue, of tax, and it also includes the deficit and the sources of said deficit. This is in the income and the input side. So at that point, when Parliament then says that input, you said you want revenue estimates to be X amount, they say yes.
But I'm trying to tell you they've never tabled revenue estimates.
But this is the structure.
No, but they
of
have
the law.
not done it. Eric, I don't know why you're not catching up. We have never tabled revenue estimates.
So we have never even approved external borrowing.
No, we've only approved external borrowing as an expenditure item, not as a revenue item.
Yes.
So we have approved it. Listen
we have
to
not
me very
approved
carefully.
borrowing. We
No,
have approved
we have approved borrowing.
spending.
No. We have approved borrowing because you can borrow for debt.
But
For
borrowing-
development projects. You take debt for development projects.
Yes.
And that is anchored in the appropriations development. So that is approved. Are we together?
Yes.
You have two bills. I'm saying the revenue estimates where you're going to get money, right, is never been approved because we've never put down revenue
And
estimates.
this money you're talking about, is it just money in general, whether it's domestic or whether it's foreign?
Everything.
Everything.
What are your revenue targets?
You see where we're getting confused here because already we have approved that we can borrow to repay debt.
Yes.
So when the money comes in, it's not revenue. It's just a debt.
Yes. Now that is the lacuna. Now this is the whole point. The fact that we are going around this, right?
Yes.
Is because people have not followed the law. It is very simply this, and I repeat, so that now you guys have got to catch this. You have two books that you're supposed to table before Parliament: revenue estimates and expenditure estimates. Revenue has never been tabled, but expenditure has. And expenditure has two columns. One is development, one is recurrent. Now, they can say that in as much as we didn't take revenue estimates on external debt, for example, we anchored external debt in the expenditure of development projects, right? Because if you look at, as I gave you the example of the project of a water project in Kitui, right? It will show Danida is where we are borrowing from, and Parliament approved that, all right? But there's nowhere in the development estimates, expenditure estimates, that there is an anchor for domestic debt.
Can we look at the loans that are being paid currently by government, where we say there's a schedule that then needs to be met by a particular point in time? What you're saying, Jimmy, if we carry it to its logical conclusion here, is that there is money that is being paid in name of loans for which there was never an initial approval for, and that these loans did not go towards development, and that is what they were supposed to do if they were actually borrowed.
This is part 2 of our investigation. And I want to be very categorical on this. Part 2 of our investigation is addressing domestic debt. And domestic debt has not been approved anywhere as a debt to be taken for any development project. It has never been approved anywhere as a debt to be taken to finance any deficit. Anywhere.
So
in the budget. In the budget. Because
So
please
where
understand,
the loan-
Parliament must approve this.
Sure.
In
But
budget.
what is interesting
But Parliament
is that
has approved
Parliament
revenues.
has approved in recurrent expenditure the payment of domestic
these-
debt as a loan,
But
it's never approved its uptake. Because if you approve its uptake, it means that it must be anchored on a project.
right. So
And
if
it is not anchored on a project. And there's nowhere there has been a statement that that money is going to finance a deficit.
And a debt is not a project.
It's not a project.
So where has this
Correct.
payment? Right. So
Correct. So what happens? What happens? And and now we're running. I kept telling you this is going to be short time. What has happened? Okay, very interestingly, right? And I'll give it a very quick summary.
Yeah.
Is that over the last 10 years, right? We have taken about almost 5 trillion in domestic debt. We have paid interest on domestic debt to the tune of 2.6 trillion shillings.
Okay.
2.6 trillion shillings.
Over a period
In
of
interest.
Over the last 9 years.
interest.
Interest of 2.6 trillion shillings.
And what was this
In
for?
this financial year,
Yep.
domestic debt payments of the 1.8 is 1 trillion shillings.
Okay.
660 being interest, 340 being principal.
What sort of loan did you take?
Yes. And it did not go towards a project.
So we cannot.
It is more
basically-
than half of our external debt payments, and it did not go towards a project. But Isitoshe, we have gone on to further analyze our tax revenue. Right? Because Kenya Revenue issues a statement every year of how much tax it collects. The central bank records that income, so does National Treasury. And over the last 10 years, our taxes, which go towards our counties, which go towards external and domestic debt, which go towards salaries of government staff, operations of government. Let me tell you something. They even yield a surplus of 338 billion shillings. A surplus.
What?
So we have had no deficit. That is what I'm
The
saying.
tax
We have
pay.
had no
The
zero
tax
deficit.
we pay
Yes.
do not yield a deficit. They yield a tax surplus.
Bas.
Okay?
How much did you say?
338 over the last 10 years.
Jimmy,
Now is it toshed? No. I want to.
the
let me
audience,
tell you,
the
people
audience
have
has
rushed me
voted
today.
online. The audience has voted. We need 3 hours with Jimmy.
Yes. I voted.
The audience has voted. People have said we need 3 hours. 3 hours here, 1 hour, people just asking you those questions. Those that do not understand, those that would like to get further clarification.
And if the people
set a
tell us
date.
to bring you, we will bring you.
You give the date.
3 hours.
No, we'll give him 2. 3 hours is the whole show.
No, I think it will take you 1 hour yourselves and 1 hour for the people. And then now you give me 1 hour
Jimmy,
to summarize.
Do you know how long it takes me to understand what you said?
Right, let's now take another quick breather. Remember, News Center is lined up for you. Today we talk about the state of tertiary education in the country. Students joining university are set to do so in September. So we discuss all that, the financial implications. And in studio we have our 2 special guests. I shall be introducing them to you later on. But first, let's take the breather.